Okay, so last time you saw us, I was talking about needing to clean this edge up. What you're looking at, which hopefully you can see, is my cut line ended up being about an 1/8 inch below the factory body line, which is good. I got to looking at this and realized I need to clean it up like I mentioned. And the best time to clean up the inside of this corner is when you have the cab corner off, because obviously you can get up in there a lot better. Got to looking at the back side of the pillar. A lot of surface rust and some pretty significant pitting. So I decided to take the sandblaster to it and clean it up inside there. And we'll show you here, hopefully. Let's see. Hopefully you can see this. Headlamp blocking the light. You should be able to see that surface pitting on the bottom of that pillar right in here. And if you look to the left, right in there, these 3 spots and that spot is where the surface pitting was really deep and the sandblaster just blew it right out. So that's one good thing about using a sandblaster on low pressure, is if you blast it with keyword low pressure and this happens, that's a pretty good indicator you just should go ahead and replace it. Because when you look at this, sometimes it's hard to tell how thin the metal actually got. And a great example of that is from the outside. This corner in here looks pretty good. And I might consider saving that part until I looked at it from this angle. Let's see if you can see that. See how thin that is up in here? Right up in here compared to like down here and up here. That's a weak spot. And that right here is not too far away from that. So odds are what's gonna have to happen is I know that I'm gonna cut out about the bottom inch of this, the lower pillar. But I'm gonna cut out part of this. But when you cut out this much, the problem is keeping some sort of reference. And when you cut out this much and you're doing all this work, keeping as much reference as you can helps you in the long run. So we'll just have to evaluate when we get closer. So now what we're gonna do is continue fitting up the cab corner where we left off last time. So our next move is to fit up our cab corner and figure out how much we want to cut off, because you just want to make small cuts down to what you end up needing, and I'm going to show you how I do that. Okay, I see what's going on now. So I need to cut out. So right now all I'm doing is getting this cut down to where I need it to do a rough fit. So what I'm going to do is cut off about 1/2 inch off the end here so we can fit. There we go. Now I'm just going to rough clamp it.
make sure that we're lining the patch panel up. The body line, make sure the body line's lined up on the body line on the truck. So I'm going to make a little mark over here, pretty close to where that body line sits. Okay, so I'll walk around. I got it clamped in both those spaces. Oh, you can actually see it pretty good. Okay, so now what I'm gonna do is mark a line right there. And the way I'm gonna do that is I'm just gonna go and So one thing that we're going to do before we cut that out on this line, we're going to cut a lot of our excess off, and I'll show you how we're going to do that. But essentially we're going to cut all this top off probably, or we could leave it. But the idea,
the basic idea is you don't want to make that final cut. Okay, so since we were last on, I ended up deciding to cut the stamp, the reproduction stamp off right above that body line and over, and get rid of that indent, because it lets the piece sit flatter against the cab. And I just have it clamped there, and I put one of those self tappers right there. So also, since I was on, I needed to cut out my inner rocker. And if you're doing this with the regular floor, you don't have to do that. If you get the new floor pan regular without the high hump, I explained that in one of the previous videos, why I'm cutting mine out. Or if you have a factory floor original and you have to replace your inner rocker, you can go ahead and cut some of it out of the way if you need to, but you shouldn't. And the way you do it is you actually fit up the cab corner, pillar, outer rocker, and then once you get all that squared away, then you do the inner rocker. So the next thing that I'm going to do is take a peek, and let me get a light. Next thing we are going to do is look at the pillar, excuse me. So the only thing that I've done to this pillar is I cut off the top. I just set it up there and got it pretty close and gave her a cut. So that's where I'm at. You haven't missed anything crazy. So let me get the camera set. Let's see. hopefully I'm going to be able to do this in a way that you can see what I'm doing. So once you get your pillar cut, hopefully you can see this. If you take a look at the cab, and I'll show you some pictures of the other side, but if you look at that line, this is not a good curve. This curve right here does not match that curve. And you're never going to see that, but if you're in this to try and prevent any rust, you want to make these panels fit each other as best as possible, so when you weld them up and you seam seal, you really prevent, like if you were just to stick that in there, you're going to leave a huge gap. It might be hard to tell now. Hopefully you can see that gap in there, but that's what happens when you don't take the time to make these panels match. So there's a big gap right there, the bigger gap on the bottom. So what I'm going to end up doing is rounding that off to match the cab corner, and I am going to make a flange that's going to be, I'm going to probably cut that off and make a wider flange to match what I've got here. So let's see what we've got. So that's the gap that I'm talking about, and you can see, hopefully, that the bottom of this pillar does not match the cab corner. So you're going to end up with a lot of big gaps when you get a seam seal. So this part's up to you. I'm going to do some extra work, and I'm going to cut this flange off and make it wider to match this. So that's my next step. Not sure how much of it I'll record, but we'll be back shortly. And if you recall, I noted that I was going to cut some of this out. I am still going to do that, but it's probably going to be after. I haven't made up my mind because I actually cut this panel out before I decided to do any of this videotaping. So we'll see. I can always put this in and address this later. So that might be what we'll end up doing, but you'll see.